I have talked about my road trip on here before. I took the first vacation of my life last year. A rebuilt Yamaha and a foolish sense of optimism carried me across the western United States. Being adventurous seriously made me rethink everything I thought I knew about the world. I love Seattle with the hip original hippie neighborhoods and the carnival atmosphere of Pike Place Market. Getting out of Seattle was a total nightmare. Restricted to back roads by a motor that capped at 40 miles an hour, I must have gotten lost a dozen times, despite all the help I received from baffled gas station attendants. So I was behind schedule when it came to finding my campsite. Some miles south and a little east of the city, there's a free campground. It's most often used by horse riders. And boy, can you smell it. That's actually what guided me in the last few miles. There's a gravel road off the service road, and then a few crooked unpaved roads off of that. The trail markers were all bent, broken, or faded. In the end, I had to follow my nose. I set up my junior scout tent in the fading twilight. Mine was the only one there. I had the place all to myself. After a quick meal of apples from a previous campground, I did my travel log on my video camera before turning in for the night. I'm not sure how long I slept. I know I checked the time, but I can't recall what it was. Something had disturbed my well-earned beauty rest, but I was too groggy to remember what it was. That's when I sat up, too alert to fall back asleep, but too sleepy to be totally awake. That's when something brushed the side of my tent, and suddenly, I was more awake now than I had ever been. I had done plenty of camping by that point. I was familiar with the sounds of the nighttime critters, from raccoons to coyotes. Nothing had ever bothered me in my tent before, just snuffle around camp before wandering off and leaving me be. From the sound of the footsteps, it was walking on two legs. My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible conclusion: a bear. There's a lot of conflicting information out there about how to deal with bears, and a lot of it depends on the type of bear. Sitting there in the dark with my heart beating in my throat, I had no way of telling what kind I was dealing with. Should I shout out or play dead? I was about 30 yards from a sturdy cement block outhouse that might be better shelter. As quietly as I dared, I slipped my boots on and got ready to dash. The zipper of the tent seemed impossibly loud in the night as I worked it slowly and slowly. After getting it to be fully open, I slowly went outside. Once outside, I craned my neck around to see if the bear, if that's what it was between me and the outhouse. With the incredible illumination of the Milky Way, I could see the campground clearly all the way to the tree line. There was nothing out there. However, I had this feeling that something was watching me. It was like feeling an insect crawl along the back of my neck. There was no logical way for me to know that something had its eyes on me out there in the dark, in the middle of nowhere, all alone. I couldn't dismiss it. Still on high alert, I crept along and tried not to crunch the gravel under my feet too loud. The outhouse was still my best bet. The door was propped open by a stone, but inside there was a heavy-duty bolt lock. I would have to spend the night surrounded by the smell of not only horse, but also human poop. But I figured that was a fair trade for not getting killed or eaten. My hand was on the latch when I heard the awful crunch of footsteps and gravel behind me. I kicked the stone propping the door open out of the way and slammed the heavy metal door shut, no longer caring how much noise I made. Whatever was on the other side had fingers. Something tugged on the door as I struggled to bolt it shut. I won, but it was close. There was a metal mesh along the top of the outhouse for ventilation. Through the top, I could hear the heavy breathing that matched my own. My phone was back in my tent because I'm an idiot. There was no way to tell time. That's when the same stupid impulse that brought me out there in the first place kicked in. I had to know. Hello? Silence. Maybe this person didn't hear me. But then, hello? I could have shit myself. I was in the right place for it. The voice sounded like my own, and the sound of it was a kick to the gut. I couldn't even tell you why it made me so uneasy. The sensation was like when you're walking upstairs and you're expecting another step, but your foot comes down on an empty space. I'm sorry. I thought I was alone, I said. I am alone. Every syllable was off. Hey, I'm sorry, I freaked out. I didn't think there was anyone else out here. Sorry, I'm here. You would think that if I knew it was another camper, I would have opened the door, but I never did. Some deeply buried instinct kept me from taking my hand off the boat. Hey, you scared the crap out of me. Are there more tent sites out in the trees or something? I am something. There are more. The words made me sick to my stomach. Again, I couldn't have even told you why, only that they did. And from its odd speech, I guess English wasn't his first language. Do you need to go? Use the bathroom, I mean? Because I'm going to be in here for a while. That wasn't a lie. I wouldn't even open the door if it was my own mother on the other side. You need to go. Its English was improving with every sentence. There was something weird about that. Hey, look, I'm sorry if I scared you, but you started it by creeping around in the dark. I'm not gonna come out. Can you go somewhere else? I'll be gone in the morning, I promise. I just wanted to sleep in peace.
You need to be gone. I promise you, I creep in the dark. You won't be here in the morning.
Fear closed my mouth shut. The more I spoke, the more he did, and I didn't want to hear his voice anymore. I'm sure that made me sound like a bigot or something, but I had the feeling I was feeding words to him, and the feeling was not pleasant. It felt like he was hungry for them. The same instinct that told me to keep quiet the first time kept me from running my dumb mouth off again. I was dealing with someone who was not mentally well, or was something else. The way he was speaking, and the way his words were coming out, and the tone and voice, there was no doubt that he was going to carry out what he was saying. I kept my hands on the boat, while they cramped on the first rays of sun, crept through the mesh at the top of the walls of my shelter. It wasn't until the sun was strong enough to make me sweat in my self-imposed prison that I felt brave, stupid, enough to speak again. Hey, are you still out there? Hello? Anyone? There was no answer, which was the best outcome I could hope for. I opened the door. My tent was untouched, at least from a distance. The oppressive feeling of being watched had dissipated. I dressed and broke down camp in record time. My moped cranked to life, but it wasn't until I went to put my helmet on that I saw the footprint. I had kicked that rock pretty far. It was close to my bike. Naturally, I went over to it. I had to know. In a clear outline of fresh mud, there was a single print on the smooth gray of the stone. Not human, but a hoof like that of a horse or goat. It was so fresh, so vivid. It hadn't been there last night when I used the bathroom before I gone to bed, and the soft mud in front of the outhouse door were more of the same. Some of them on top of my own boot prints. If you want to go looking for whatever the hell it was, be my guest. Just be careful with your words out there, because I figured out what was wrong with that voice when I watched the playback of my travel log video. It was my own. I was at home with my friend Samantha a few hours after school ended, when my dad called me to let me know that he wasn't going to be able to be home that night. There was going to be a really bad storm, and he said he was going to stay at a friend's house with a few coworkers and then drive 2 hours. My dad works in construction. He works at different locations for every new project, and this one happened to be far. My mom came home not too long after, completely soaked in rain. She talked to Sam for a bit before telling us that she was going to be upstairs taking a shower and filling out some paperwork from the office. Shit was thrown into the air at around 8 p.m. when Sam and I heard knocking on the door. It was already weird, because who the fuck is even out there in this weather? It was pouring rain and the streets looked like an actual stream of piss. I went down to the door, dragging Sam with me, only to be greeted by nothing. We were looking out the door for a little under 5 seconds when we heard knocking again. Now this is when the shit that was thrown into the air hit the fan. Sam and I instantly pissed ourselves when we realized that someone was knocking on my back door being the door leading to the backyard. We quietly went up the stairs to my mom's room, finding her asleep, not even changed out of her work clothes. I woke her up immediately and told her someone was in our backyard. This obviously caused a little bit of panic, and seeing her so freaked out Sam and I even more. This might not sound as scary to you, but being home without my dad in the house was scary enough on its own. Mom went down into the kitchen, with us trailing not even 2 feet behind her, and she pulled out her rolling pin. Before we could reach the door, the knocking stopped. My mom reached over and pulled the curtain back. All Sammy and Mom saw was pitch black, but at a quick glance, I swear, I saw someone standing a few feet away from the door. Maybe it was because I was the only one of us facing its direction, but it was tall as fuck, like 7 feet, and maybe over that. That's all I could tell you because that's all I saw of it. It was most likely just one of those tree branches. It's really windy out there, Mom said. I could tell Sammy wasn't too sure, and I knew damn well it wasn't a tree branch, but why freak the rest of them out? Now I know I should have told them that we could have left, but I kept quiet for their sake. About an hour after that, Mom decided to go to the department store down the street to pick up some dinner and left both of us at home. It was only 5 minutes later when we heard knocking again. I quickly felt uneasy. I went down to the door and asked who it was. The following 5 seconds of silence were the longest 5 seconds of my life. It's me. It was Mom, but at the same time I felt like it wasn't. Looking back now, I realized her voice sounded like it was lacking all human characteristics. It wasn't playful, nor was it frustrated at how long we were keeping her out in the rain. It sounded like she didn't even know what emotions were. I opened the door without unlocking the chain and was greeted by my mom. Sam and I let her in and she came without any bags. She sat down on the couch for a few minutes, looking around. She was so fucked up. She seemed glitchy, like her actions weren't flowing smooth. Mom, are you okay? You don't seem right. Her eyes looked at me before the rest of her face turned. It was just a long walk. Cold. Outside. Raining. She kept listing words and phrases that made little sense. I was getting more uneasy by the second, but I think Sam was just glad we weren't home alone anymore. The scariest thing that happened that night happened during one of my mom's rambling. Sammy had asked her what we were having for dinner, and she started listing more foods that we didn't even have. Halfway through what she was saying, I received a text from Mom. Ask Sammy what she wants. Take your time deciding. It's so warm in here. My heart instantly dropped. Mom was right in front of me. Sam and whatever was pretending to be Mom directed their attention to me. Looking back at this moment, Sam said that all color had drained from my face. Who is it? My mom asked me. Wrong number. I quickly flashed a smile. You look tired, Mom. Do you want to go to bed? Sam and I will make dinner. I think I just need a bath. We nodded and she stood up and made her way to the stairs. She was at the bottom of the stairs when I pulled out my phone to take a photo. I looked down at it for 1 second to cancel the 20% remaining notification, but when I looked back up, Mom was already at the top step. I can't stress this enough. The time in which I looked at my phone and looked back up was impossible for someone for anyone to walk 13 steps. I ran back to Sammy and waited until we both heard the water in the bathroom running. Sam, my mom texted me. When that thing was talking to us, my mom texted me. She started freaking out. Maybe she meant to send the text earlier, but it was only delivered till now. It seemed valid. Apple is always glitchy like that, but we decided to call her anyways just to make sure. Just as the phone started ringing, someone knocked on the door. We went to see who it was, and Sammy was about to open it, but I put my hand in front of her. I was so terrified at this point that I was in tears. Sammy stared at me in confusion. "Hey, Mom," I said into the phone. I was shaking, and when Sammy heard me say that, she looked like she was about to throw up. "Open the door, it's freezing outside." I sighed in relief and threw the door open. My mom was standing there with the phone pressed to her ear and her shopping bags around her feet. We explained what was happening, and it took my mom 2 minutes of hearing the story for her to climb up the stairs and walk towards the bathroom. She literally kicked the door open and found the tub almost filled to the rim. The window was open and the fly screen was torn. The rest of the night consisted of us trying to get over what happened. We ended up sleeping together in my mom's room, and my dad came home early next morning. I started researching a few days ago about similar experiences, and the only thing I could find was it was most likely the Goat Man. I'm still freaking the fuck over what happened this last weekend. I think it's still out there. I fucking hope so. This all began a few months ago when I moved here from Eastern Washington to attend a university. I recently turned 21, but I didn't have any friends around to celebrate. So I did the next best thing, rolled a blunt, and ended up watching some stuff on Hulu. I'm living the life here. Recreational weed, undeclared major, living off my savings. And finally, no more parents nagging at my door to do something with my life. Or at least I thought so. The first time I heard it, I thought I was paranoid. I smoke a ton of pot, and living in a new city doesn't help either. People say I live in the party area of downtown. Belltown, I think they call it. It just seems like an endless parade of people and drug street kids skulking at all times of night. And to be honest, it doesn't really bother me that much. I drown that shit out with headphones anyways. I much prefer it to that cold, deafening silence. The silence so strong you start realizing just how bad your situation actually is. A silence that conjures nightmare creatures from the deepest reaches of your mind to explain the occasional noise and the environment of a quiet house. It was in that silence that I heard it. I was grinding some bud for my third bowl of the night when I noticed the empty quiet that filled the space outside of my apartment. I'm on the ground floor, so I'm basically used to all types of screaming, singing, arguing, and fighting when the sun goes down. But not now. Not tonight. There was nothing. It came from the window in my quote-unquote kitchen, because it's literally 2 burners and a mini fridge with a microwave on top. Despite what you know or think about stoner stereotypes, I'm pretty fucking immaculate when it comes to cleaning too. That's why I was puzzled when I investigated the sound. Small amounts of dirt speckle across the small excuse for a counter under the window. The window was closed. I cleaned off the counter and figured I was too high to remember making that mess earlier. Fear was overcome by a wave of relaxation when I hit my pipe. Purple Kush. Family Guy eased me into a coma, and by the morning, I didn't even bother thinking about the noise from the night before. But from then on, it kept happening. Night after night after night. The same 3. Always at different times too. 1 o'clock, 2:45, 1:37, 3:40. There wasn't really a pattern to it, just the same weird interval of scratches. It seemed to be getting faster every time. I just started assuming it was someone fucking with me. Maybe some guys picked a place to fuck with every night after they left the bar, and I just happened to get lucky. This explanation would actually help me calm down, and I was eventually convinced that this was all it was. I still didn't have any friends here, and with the cold snap and rain, I didn't really feel like going out and making any yet. The school semester was almost over, and I noticed that I wasn't getting enough sleep. The scratching was getting louder now, and joke or not, I had to get some rest before finals week. One of my classmates suggested going camping. She even offered to let me use her tent and sleeping bag. She said that getting out of the city once in a while and being in nature helps calm the mind. Kinda hippie sounding, but I was stoned when she said it. I took up the offer and made a reservation at the campground. I'm not gonna mention where at, because it might still be down there, waiting for someone. The girl from my class met me at a Starbucks downtown and gave me her camping gear. I really appreciated the kindness, but I'm not sure if my high as fuck monotone voice and glossy red eyes convey any evidence of that. Didn't matter anyways. I packed a couple grams of bud, my pipe, and my old camera. I got inspired by all the Milky Way pictures that people post online, and sleep or not, that was my mission now. The trip out to the park was long. I saw maybe one gas station for 20 miles, and I ate my snacks on the way there. I stopped there to re-up the trail mix and Cliff bars and muscle milks before I continue on my way. The clerk looked Native American, kinda old too. He had this weird look in his eyes when I approached him, as if he was about to say something but cut himself off, and silently rang up my tasty treats. It was his eyes, though, that bothered me. He had this look of sympathy, and dread, and sadness, all in one. Maybe I was analyzing the situation too hard, but it seemed like he wanted to tell me something. Whatever though, I had a galaxy to photograph. The campsite was okay. I pitched the tent fast even though some of the poles were missing, and didn't snap all the way. I took a hit off my pipe and looked up at the sky, camera in hand ready to snap that winning Milky Way shot. Clouds. Nothing but a fucking gray sky. Too tired to drive, I got in the tent and listened to a podcast from my phone speakers. I don't remember when I fell asleep, but I did, eventually. And then, I woke up. It was scratching at the fucking tent. Get the fuck off my tent, douchebags. And again, I was met with that cold silence. No one responded. I was somewhat paralyzed from fear, but in that brief moment, I checked my phone to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I refreshed the news app and saw it update in real time. Kind of a dumb way to check that everything is okay. But I guess it doesn't matter when... All around the tent, I heard it scratching and scratching to a point where I thought I was just going insane. My heart pounded out of my chest, and my anxiety was at the highest point it's ever been my entire life. Each passing moment of silence felt like another calm to a storm of horror. The scratching in my imagination. I couldn't get out of the tent. I couldn't speak. I waited and waited. It continued, scratching faster and faster, and suddenly, I heard something. The way it spoke, definitely not normal sounding for a person. The fact I was even questioning the humanity in its voice was reason enough to piss myself, which I did. For a grown-ass man, I was on the verge of tears. This was too much. I grabbed my car keys and phone, and weed, and unzipped the front flap. I bolted to the car, not looking back as I ran. The keys fumbled around the lock and I could hear something behind me. Turning. It sounded huge, but it sounded like it was on 2 feet. The key slid in, and that's when I remember I had a clicker. It was in this moment of dumb realization I got the ignition started, turned the high beams on, and reversed out of my spot to hightail it out of the camp. Nothing in front of me. I peeked the rear view mirror before hitting the gas, only to see two long, hair-covered legs lit up by my brake lights, making giant strides towards my rear window. I stomped on the pedal, whatever it was trying to catch up to me, but it gave up after I approached about 60 miles per hour. The drive back was a relief, and a part of me still could not believe what happened. When I got home, it was already morning. The sun was up, and I could see people staggering back from bars and nightclubs. It was a moment of relief. I felt a little back to normal, until I got out of the car to get the supplies. Huge gashes were scratched into the window and door, and my tailpipe was slightly bent. At least I'm not crazy, I thought. I lifted up the rear hatch, and that's when I realized I forgot that I abandoned that girl's camping gear out in the campsite. My stomach dropped. There's no way she would believe my story. But that's when I noticed something else in the back seat of my car. Dirt. Small amounts of it speckle across the floor and seats. I'm writing this from home, and as an update, it's 4:53 p.m. And I just want to let y'all know, it's back. I'm writing this to warn you, or to educate you. I haven't decided yet, but you need to understand something. I don't know what I saw, but I do know that I never want to see it again. And I'm warning you, don't go out looking for it. I live and go to college in a small mountain town in Colorado, but often go home to see family, as most of them live in Texas. And I'm actually attached to visiting my cat. Now, in order to get home, I have to make most of my drive through New Mexico, through Santa Fe, and about 160 miles through the desert, which, if you aren't familiar with, don't try to get acquainted with it. Or if you're planning to go out there, I hope this story will change your mind. On this drive, I had 3 other people with me. My younger sister Andrea, and 2 friends from school, Jess and Katie. It was our spring break, and instead of buying stupid price plane tickets, we decided to pile into my little Mercury vehicle and book it back to Texas. Unfortunately, we left the valley a little later than we were supposed to, because someone, which was actually me, was forgetting their wallet. So by the time we hit the stretch of desert, it was close to 1 a.m. It had been raining since before we headed through Santa Fe. Not super heavy, but heavy enough. It was 65 degrees. I do remember that, because it had been in negatives for quite a while because of where I go to school, so I was pleased to see something over 5 degrees. For this next part of the story, I need you to understand something. I hadn't been driving that long. I was actually awake. I didn't hallucinate, and I damn sure wasn't the only one who saw it. So please, believe me. We passed a white Prius. As he was driving away, I looked in my rear view mirror and saw something crossing the road, caught in the red glow of the taillights. It was walking with a horrible limp and dragging itself across the road on 2 legs. The motions were unnatural, even jerky. I slammed on my brakes, thinking someone had driven off the road and was stuck or injured. I slid to a stop about 20 feet away from it. The Prius had stopped as well, seeing the person in the road. I opened my door and stuck my head out in the rain to get a better view. It wasn't human. It stopped. The figure was illuminated by the taillights of both of our vehicles. It had to have been at least 7 feet tall, possibly 8. The skin was stretched like a too small shirt, cracking, hanging off its frame in long bloody ribbons. The jaw was almost totally unhinged from its face, the cheekbones disgusting. The skin on the scalp was thin, and spots of bloody white stuck out. And the smell, I had never smelled anything like it. As soon as I opened the door, it hit me. Rotting flesh, meat that has been left out for months, rotten milk, the kind of stuff nightmares are made of. The Prius took off, squealing its tires into the night. But I stayed. Fight or flight hadn't kicked in yet for me. This thing couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. It slowly turned its head, each vertebrae in the neck individually cracking like fucking bubble wrap. We made eye contact, but it had no eyes, only darkness. I slammed my car door shut and sped off. At this point, my friends all woke up and saw it too. Katie was in the back and hysterical. Jess was silent, her mouth set into a grin. Andrea just sat with a look of fear, tears silently streaming down her face. My friend kept screaming, "What the fuck was that? What the fuck was that, Alex?" I didn't know what to tell her. I just kept driving, my hands gripping the wheel as we broke 80. Then something happened that I still, to this day, cannot explain. The temperature dropped during the whole event. It was 30 degrees out. It had been 65 no more than 5 minutes ago. It then began to snow, heavy, wet snow. We ended up pulling over at a gas station called Klein's Corner. No one moved. Andrea was crying, and Jess was praying. Kate was cursing and I was shaking. "What the fuck just happened?" Kate said, all color drained from her face. I looked at her, my face with fear. "I don't know. I don't want to know, but we need to leave." I slowly put the car into drive and continued our trip. I don't remember the rest of the drive. All I know is that everything else was fine. We reached Texas by 6 a.m. Nothing else happened. I'm not sure what it was. The closest I could come to was a Skinwalker. Maybe it was a shapeshifter that had a bad change. I really don't know. Please believe me when I tell you this. I'm not crazy. I know what I saw. Don't go looking for it. Don't follow it, because it might end up following you back. Okay, so I've been a skeptic of creepy paranormal things my entire life. I have never believed in that type of stuff, but the things I have heard, witnessed at my grandparents' farm shakes me to my core. My grandparents own a large plot of land in central Missouri, and they have owned that land for around 40 years. I've been to that farm over 10 times, and every time I go, I always get this terrifying feeling that something is watching me. Like, there's always something behind my back. I have also had many strange encounters there that are downright bizarre. My first encounter with whatever the hell this thing was when I was around the age of 7 or 9. I'm currently 14. We had brought our dog named Spot to that farm. He was a silver lab who I loved dearly. I was exploring the forest behind the house, just enjoying the summer breeze, when my dog started growling. A deep, sinister growl that I had never heard him make. I turned around quickly to see what he was growling at, but I couldn't see anything but forest among more forest. While my eyes were scanning the area of where my dog was growling, some animal shot out of the brush so fast I could barely see what it was, and before I knew it, it was gone. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, absolutely flabbergasted by what I just witnessed. From what I could see of it, it looked like a coyote, but the speed at which it moved was absolutely insane. It moved like at 90 miles an hour and made almost no noise. But the most creepy part was that the place it jumped out of didn't even make an imprint of where it was laying. And from where I viewed it jumping up, I should have been able to easily see where it was hiding. Shocked by what I witnessed, I just decided that was enough and went back inside the house. My second encounter happened when I was around 10. I was visiting the place, and like usual, I was getting the feeling I was being watched. That first day was normal, and nothing really creepy happened. I was just spending quality time with family. But when night came, that's when shit started happening. I was trying to sleep in the twin bed that was shared by my mom's brother when he used to live there. That's when I heard tapping. Not tiny little taps, but loud tap. Almost like it was banging. It was coming from the direction of the window. I slowly sat up and looked at the window, but there was nothing. So I assumed it was just some animal or something like that. 5 minutes passed and no tapping, and I was drifting off to sleep when, this time, not a tap, a slam, a loud slam directly into the window. I'm not talking about like a hit. It sounded as if something absolutely massive hit the window. I shot up so quickly I nearly passed out. I decided enough was enough and grabbed the flashlight in the drawer and shined it out the window. Nothing. 10 seconds passed. Nothing. I was about to go crawl into my mom's bed when I heard it. A screech. A screech that was not achievable by any human. So loud it pierced the quiet, peaceful summer night. I can't put into words what that sound sounded like, but it was dark and horrible, and I still remember it to this day. I froze, unable to move muscle. I was so scared. I was sitting there still as a statue, petrified by what I heard. That's when my instincts kicked in, and they told me to run into my mom's room, which I did. For some reason, I didn't wake her up. I just cuddled up next to her and didn't sleep the entire night. All I could think of was that sound, that horrific, terrible, bloody screech. My next encounter was when I was around the age of 13. I was back at my grandparents', just enjoying my time, like I always do when my grandpa suggested that we go deer watching. I agreed because I had been doing this since as long as I could remember. And it was never an issue, and it was extremely fun. So we took the Polaris, and we went around 6 to 7 p.m. to look for deer. We decided to go into the most eastern pasture, because that's usually where we spotted the most deer. 30 minutes passed, and we had seen a few deer, but not as much as we usually do. But then, this is where the shit begins. I get that feeling again, that dreadful feeling that something is there, in the shadows, watching me. But this time, it's a lot more intense. Like if it's right up behind me, but when I look, it's never there. But this time, it appears that my grandpa feels the same presence as me too. And just to let you all know, my grandpa is a very laid-back individual, always joking and having a laugh. The only time I've seen him be very serious is when my great-uncle died a couple of years ago. So when I started feeling that I'm being watched, my grandpa goes from a happy and laid-back expression to very serious and alert. He gripped the wheel so tight, his knuckles turned white, and he was just looking around like to make sure something wasn't following us. He then made a massive U-turn out of nowhere and started heading back to the house. I asked him, "What are you doing?" And he replied with, "We're heading back to the house." The tone of his voice was cold, like he had witnessed someone being murdered. At this point, he was gripping the wheel even harder and was absolutely going pedal to the metal full speed back to the house. I decided not to ask any questions until we got back to the house, which we did in no time at all. Once we were there, he rushed me into the house, checking his bag to make sure something wasn't there. When we were inside, he closed and locked the door tight. His behavior was very alarming, and it really shocked me to my core. I then decided that all of the stuff I had witnessed was enough, and I only asked him one question: "What the hell is going on here?" When I said that, he looked at me and gave me a cold expression and said, "I have some things I need to explain to you." We then sat down for 30 minutes, and he explained that whatever this thing was, it was living on his property, and it has been here since the day he moved in, and he and my mother experienced the same thing that was happening to me the very first few years of living here. He explained that he has seen whatever this thing is, and it doesn't like new visitors. He told me about all the things he had witnessed and experienced, and they seemed to have been very pretty similar to what was happening to me. He told me that he knew this was going to happen to me, and that he was always watching to make sure I never got hurt, because he knew this creature better than anyone else. We talked some more, but all of it was the same. It was now late, and he decided that I couldn't sleep alone, so he had me sleep with my mom. We promptly left the next morning. I have not been back since that day. This last encounter isn't really an encounter. Two things have happened at my grandparents' farm. Recently, we brought my sister's horse to the farm. The first night for the horse was hell. My sister's horse has always been very friendly and not shy, but the first night of my sister's horse being at the farm was bizarre. The next morning, my grandpa woke up and was doing his usual chores and went to go feed the horse. He noticed that the horse was acting very weird, extremely shy and timid, but when he took a better look, he was shocked. The horse had 3 10-inch gashes down its side, like something had clawed at it. It was ruled out that the horse ran into the fence, but I think otherwise. Also, around the same time, my grandparents adopted a dog and named it Panda. Panda was a Jack Russell Terrier who was 2 months of age. 5 days later, he was found dead with deep puncture wounds on his body and with his neck slashed up. They said it was a bobcat or mountain lion, but I also think otherwise. This story comes from a 28-year-old young man who calls himself Leo. When he was a boy, his grandmother, a Navajo woman, would tell him stories about dark spirits and skinwalkers. He recalls he used to wave her off, telling her there was no such things. In fact, whenever he would go out at night, he would make sure to tell her and make fun of her that he'll be walking alone. However, his arrogance came back to get him shortly after his 17th birthday. On the evening in question, he is out cruising about with 2 of his cousins, just drinking a few beers, listening to music, and doing a whole bunch of laughing. From St. Michael's, Arizona, their purposeless selves takes them through Sawmill and then along the back roads in and around Chinle, where they eventually get lost for a while, driving deep in the woods and looking for anything they might recognize as a way back to the road. Leo is sitting in the back seat on the passenger side and looking out the window. He recalls it is definitely after 10 p.m. There, deep in the trees, he sees a single fire. The flames contain to a small space and close to the ground. He is just about to say something to the others when they too react. Looking now in the direction they are pointing, he sees many more of these small fires. Literally, dozens of them, popping up there within the trees, burning brightly for a moment or two, and then going out, only to have others ignite but a few feet or yards away. This goes on all the while they are driving along through this one stretch, and seems to be keeping pace with them. Leo first has the thought that it is maybe a controlled fire process, something the local rangers and fire department do to control the undergrowth to reduce the potential for out-of-control forest fires. But being that it is nighttime, he quickly discards the idea. Besides, he notices and mentions to his two cousins that the fire so close to the base of the trees should be setting them on fire as well. Yet not one of them goes up or, from where he's looking, even gets scorched. They're both spooked and intrigued. They pull the car alongside the road and get out, beers in hand. However, they stay by the car with no desire to actually go into the woods. One of the cousins starts calling out to see if anyone will answer. The other cousin is less eager, telling everyone to be quiet and listen. But there's nothing to listen to. The fires, which continue to flare up and die down, aren't making any noise. For example, there's no crackling of anything burning, not even small twigs. Then within seconds, they find themselves standing in the dark. Every fire has now gone out, and there's not even new ones. Not believing their own eyes, they walk into the trees towards where they had agreed that one of the near fires had been. But no matter how much they look around, they can't find any sign of fire. No smoke, no charred ground, and no ashes. Nothing. There isn't even the smell of burned leaves or wood they expect to linger. But what's even more strange is that when they do go back to the car, they can't help but notice the smell of smoke on their clothes. The next morning comes, and Leo tells his grandmother and mother what he had seen. While his mother shows very little interest, there is a knowing gleam in the eyes of his grandmother, but she has nothing to say. Almost immediately after that night, Leo says everything that could possibly go wrong does. First, each one of his cousins that were with him are involved in unexplainable accidents and are hurt seriously enough. One of them receives a second-degree burn when the gas tank of a motorcycle he is working on ignites without reason or warning. The second one suffers a broken collarbone when the branch of a tree in his yard snaps and comes down across his shoulder. He too has no warning, even though he acknowledges that it is the same tree that was hit by lightning a month or so earlier. Strange enough, both accidents happen on the same day and almost at the same time. As for Leo, even though it's much less painful, all of the family vehicles break down within days of each other. It is at this point that the family makes the choice to seek the help of the local medicine man. Together, they climb into his aunt's car. She's the mother of the cousin with the broken collarbone, which had worked fine earlier that day, but now it refuses to start. Leo suggests that it's the battery, so they attempt to jumpstart it with his grandfather's truck. It is not in the best shape. It's driven only locally, and it's not even registered or insured, but it always starts. But this time, it won't turn over. Finally, they find a neighbor who is nice enough to take them. When they get to the medicine man and tell him everything, starting with the fires, he says to them, "You already know who is doing this to you." Leo recalls they all just look at one another, each without a clue. His grandmother, however, tells them that she'll explain it on the ride back home. She sends them out to the car to wait while she speaks with the medicine man. When she comes back, she tells them that it's gonna be okay. On the way back, Leo's grandmother tells them about her great-grandfather. She says that the family had a 30-acre plot which they had been living on for generations. When he passed away, and before his own children could lay claim to the property, a man and his wife built themselves a crude hogan on the far side of the property and moved in. When her great-grandfather's sons, one of whom was her grandfather, tried to evict the man from the property, he used dark medicine to chase them off. He even kept their own father from building a house on the far side of the property along the arroyo. She then tells Leo that the woods in which he and his cousins saw the fire is the outer edge of that property, and the smoke they smelled on themselves was the mark of the Skinwalker. She says the old squatter and his wife are both more than 100 years old, and even though no one has seen them for years, she's still sure that they live there still. All Leo knows is that since the visit with the medicine man, he and his family have had no further experiences with the Skinwalker. He says that there are nights when the dogs bark, and it seems they try to break free from their chains, like there's something out in the darkness, which they want no part of. On those nights, Leo is sure to say his prayers, both in Navajo and the ones he learned in the Catholic Church. He's convinced the words will protect him from the old man and his wife, two powerful skinwalkers that he doesn't want playing around in his head. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek, and it only takes about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There's always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I try to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams, there is definitely someone or something there with you. I froze, not sure what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips, I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello?" My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I was gonna faint. Hello? My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply. Hello? 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 As my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. Hello? 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 It repeated. Stop it! I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sound. There were no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. Stop it! It mimicked back. I had enough, and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard some rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the bush as it came further out and stood up on twos. I took off. I flew out of the woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, lay down, and thought about what happened. My mom came in at some point and asked me if everything was alright. I replied yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I was afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. But this terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds got quiet. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. Hello? I cried. It was all I could do. Hello? Stop it! It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said. But then, it did something new. It called my name. Amy. My mother's voice. Amy. Amy. Come here. Hello? Stop it. My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature that they called yenaglooshi, or he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that this witch had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window. Then, a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like Amy. It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it into my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is this thing seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word nagual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also in some other countries in Latino America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night. I remember because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house in a small pueblo or small town, and back in the day it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away, you have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way. And when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes. Only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a nagual. He told us he spoke to that man and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok, so I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Our ward at church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just wooded area with a little bit of swamp. We would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night, when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast, and he would hide really good, so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep in the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might have gone a little bit further than we normally go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to a swamp-like area where the water is most likely shin deep, and we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing a shirt. And with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale, but he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then, all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us, yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years everybody made fun of it, calling the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another. I am Navajo. We had an incident with an unwelcome visitor in our home. Here's what happened. My cousin is sleeping over. He's the same age as me. We're both 13 at this time. We're in my room, talking and hanging out. It is around maybe 11 p.m. It is a pleasant summer evening, so my window is wide open. It's also pretty dark outside, and my dad is in the living room watching TV. But as always, he's dozed off on the couch. My mom has already gone to bed. My cousin and I are keeping it down, but we're not ready yet to call it a night. All of a sudden, we hear the screen door to the front of the house open and slam shut. We think it's my dad. My mom, she tells us the next day she hears footsteps on the carpet. Whoever it is, she says, goes through her room and towards the bathroom, so she naturally assumes it's my dad. Then she realizes that she's unable to move, as if she's paralyzed. Still, in my room, my cousin and I again hear the screen door open and slam, only this time more loud. It wakes up my dad, and he comes to my bedroom to check on us. Finding us both there, he wants to know which one of my friends just slipped out of the house. It takes a few minutes, but we convince him we were by ourselves, and that we thought it was him going in and out. I can see by the look on his face, he's not really buying it, but he has to admit we don't seem to be lying. He then leaves, and as he's closing the door to my room, he tells us to stay out of trouble and go to sleep. All we could do is shrug. The next morning, my mom tells us about what she heard and how she could not move. She also tells us that the second time the door slams, she then hears what sounds like a horse galloping by her bedroom window. She then has all of us pray, and now, every year, we hike up the mountain to a high point and we pray for protection from evil. This event happened just south of Polaca, Arizona, within the Navajo reservation. A pair of skinwalkers, they say an old couple that lived deep back in the reservation, were seen lurking around this small cattle ranch. 2 heifers had disappeared recently, one of which was discovered down by the creek and mutilated. The man who owned the ranch, his 2 sons, and his brother armed themselves and went out to try to run them off. One of the sons, not yet 18 years of age, was searching out beyond the barn when a dark shape, materializing from the darkness itself, loomed up in front of him, almost nose to nose. As the boy attempted to raise his rifle, the figure raised its hands up to its face as if it was going to yell something. The boy, trying not to look at it in the eyes, then felt something rush into his face, like dust or sand. Even though he tried not to, he ended up taking a breath, and some of it was inhaled in. Immediately, things went dark, and he started experiencing hallucinations. The others found him only minutes later, on his knees, holding the sides of his head, and his eyes rolled back. He fell to the ground and went into some sort of trance. His body limp, and he became unresponsive. They carried him back to the house, and they summoned the local medicine man, who came and said some prayers over him, but he told the others there was nothing to be done but to wait for the dust, traces of which were still on his face, and his shirt to wear off. He promised he would come back the next day when the sun was up and bless the Hogan. Later, after he had regained consciousness, the boy swore to the others that he was the victim of a dog-faced creature. He described it as not quite as tall as he is, thin and scraggly, with patches of mangy and dark hair, a canine snout only shorter than a dog's, and with the smell of rotten eggs or worse. He said he doesn't recall anything more before passing out, other than not being able to breathe and having no control over his own body. My older sister, who is Irish, Italian, recently got married. Not her first, to this guy who is Navajo. Shortly after they settled down together, she has a boy from her first marriage. They invite me to hang out with them down on the reservation, where her new husband has a house and some property. I ended up bringing a few friends. Being a white guy, I know nothing about native or skinwalker lore. One of the friends that comes along, Gregory, however, is into horror and demons, things like that, and knows all these different werewolf, vampire, and even skinwalker stories. That first night, with not much else to do, we are out in the middle of a few 100,000 acres of hills and wooded land. We end up sitting around a small bonfire, with him telling us one story after the next. The next day we all take a walk to the elementary school to bring my nephew home. My sister usually picks him up, but she has some errands to run. Along the way, we passed this scraggly looking dude sitting beneath this tree beside the road. He looks kind of old, but in a way that is difficult to say just how old. Regardless, it's definitely creepy the way he's watching us. His eyes kind of flat and dull, as if unaffected by the sunlight. As we make our way back from the school, my nephew seems pretty quiet and shy. When he sees this guy, he ducks behind me and starts tugging on my shirt. I ask him what's up, and without taking his eyes off the guy, he whispers, "I don't like that man. He's bad." The way he said it gives me chills, but I really don't think all that much more about it. Well, that night, Gregory and my other two friends, Jeff and Sarah, and I all head out to go check out this abandoned part of the reservation, which supposedly is haunted. We had been warned not to by my brother-in-law. He says it is an inhabited place of ghosts of the past and some kind of dark being. Of course, that only serves to make us want to go even more. So we dismiss his warnings and ghost stories, take the keys to my sister's SUV, and off we go. When we first get there, I have to admit, it is a lot spookier looking and feeling than any one of us had expected, consisting of only a handful of abandoned structures, most of the faded and graying wood, and the biggest of which is only 2 stories. It looks to me to have been some sort of mining town, like the kind that you see on westerns on TV. Anyways, just about every window is completely busted out, with only a shared appointed pane hanging here and there. There isn't a single door still in place, and definitely not an item of any value anywhere to be seen. In fact, there isn't much of anything at all. As we walk around, going up to and looking into some of the places, but not entering, Jeff takes us to telling us how this reminds him of one of his past flings with some girl. Sarah and I rolled our eyes, as we always do when he starts waxing old memories and then goes off a little ways, leaving him and Gregory together. We find a cozy corner out of sight and start getting comfortable, if you know what I mean. We are going at it for all 5 seconds when we both notice it has suddenly turned chill. Just as we huddle together for warmness, we hear a blood-curdling scream. We jump up and run back into the direction of the SUV and where we last saw Gregory and Jeff. There, they are facing the remains of the storefront, their eyes staring straight ahead and oblivious to the fact that we are there. Sarah and I both look to where they are staring, and we see this creature, that it is a wolf-like creature, but yet not being a wolf completely. I'm still not sure to this day if it was real or not. Either way, I for one am scared, as I have never been in my life. Its body is fully covered in hair, and it had these long wraith-like fingers, which end in thick curled nails, definitely claw-like. Its head is the worst though. Its eyes are just these 2 chunks of dark coal, flat, and emotionless. Its mouth is full of small daggers. I'm not sure how long we stand there frozen. Finally, it takes a step forward, and as if released from some spell, we bolt to the truck. Jeff and I jump into the front seat, he to the driver's side, and me in the passenger, while Gregory and Sarah go for the back. Jeff doesn't have his license, but at that point no one's arguing. The keys are in the ignition. He starts the SUV, floors the gas, and we speed off gravel and sand flying everywhere. I look out the window on my side, and then all around. I see nothing through the cloud of dust and the darkening twilight. When I turn to look back at Gregory, the only thing he could think to say is, "You got some lipstick on your chin." Just down the road some, Jeff slows the truck. By this time we are all laughing and making fun of each other for running away from shadows. Just then, a look of fright comes over Sarah's face, and without saying a word, she points a trembling finger out towards the trees along the side of the road. There, back in the dark of the trees, is where we see the shadow-like figure running just inside the tree line, as if it's keeping pace with us, and we all yell in unison to Jeff, and he again presses down on the gas. The SUV springing to life, but that thing, whatever it is, stays with us every inch of the way. It is only when we see the lights to my sister's porch that, making the turn off to her, when we pull up to the house, my brother-in-law is out on the porch with this guy dressed in a long-sleeve button white shirt, blue jeans, and work boots. He later introduces himself as the local shaman. When we get up to the porch, the guy is in the middle of some kind of blessing. When he finishes, my brother-in-law simply turns to us and says, "Now you know, maybe next time you'll listen." Later, after the shaman leaves, he admonishes us, saying that by telling the Skinwalker stories, we put everyone out there in danger. He said just mentioning them can make them come and seek you out. To give you a little more insight about me, this story happened when I was 14 years old. I was at my friend Emily's house, since back then I lived there for personal reasons. Anyways, it was about 1 in the morning, and her parents were gone for the night. We were watching scary movies and eating out on snacks like we usually would every weekend night. After our movie, I got up to go to the restroom, and I let my friend know that I would be back. She nodded before opening up her laptop to message her boyfriend at the time. As I walked down the dark hallway and I was coming across the bathroom, I heard my friend's voice call out to me, but it was coming from the back porch that was on the right side of the hallway, which immediately struck me as odd because I never seen her leave the room or even walk past me. And why would she be outside anyways at this time? Her voice called out to me again, so I couldn't help it but walk out to the back porch. It does take a lot to scare me after all, so I wasn't bothered by this. As it turns out, it was the biggest mistake ever. A red flag should have went off right then and there when her voice became silent as I stepped outside. I called her name softly, but she didn't reply. I called her name once more, but this time, louder. And again, nothing but silence. I stepped off the porch into the grass looking into her wooded backyard, a little pissed off now because at that time, I figured she was trying to prank scare me, like she always was. It was a normal thing for her, but when I yelled her name again, a voice spoke. But it wasn't hers, it was another woman's voice. "Help me, please, for the love of God, help me." Okay, now I was officially freaked out, because there was no one around for miles, besides her one neighbor, that lives a little ways into the woods. I found myself not being able to move, curiosity maybe? But the bushes started rustling, and what looked like a dog stepped out. At first I thought it was her neighbor's dog, that must have gotten out again because it has happened before. But when this thing stood up on its hind legs, it was about 7 feet tall. That's when I really froze up. What the hell was this thing? I asked myself. I never met any human that's this tall in my entire life. Then it started to move towards me. It was walking kind of like a human, but wobbling like a baby taking its first steps. I found myself not being able to move, to get out of there like I should have. That is, until I heard the slider door being opened, and the real Emily's voice speak. "Lana, what are you doing outside? I looked around my whole house for you." As soon as she finished her sentence, I ran inside as fast as I could, and pulled my friend inside before shutting the door and locking it while closing the blinds. I did this to every room, even the basement, locking all the windows included. All the while, Emily yelling at me, asking me what the fuck was going on. I took her arm and raced into her room before slamming her door behind us. When she finally realized how terrified I was and how badly I was shaking, only then did she ask me, "Jesus, Lana, what's the matter? You look like you just seen a ghost." I finally calmed down enough to begin to tell her what I encountered, but before I got the chance to fully explain what happened, I heard extreme banging on my friend's window, which shocked us both, and we both shot up at least 10 feet in the air. I whispered, "Fuck." I realized I forgot to shut the blinds. I didn't have the heart to turn around, but when Emily's face went pale, I didn't have a choice but to look behind me. I really wish I hadn't. There, that thing was, looking into our bedroom window. I couldn't even begin to explain what it looked like. All I can come up with is that its body was twisted like someone that had just been in a freakish car accident, and it had fur, lots of it, and the eyes glowed much like a cat. A high-pitched noise escaped that thing's throat, making us not only cover our ears, but we both screamed as hard as our lungs would let us. I threw my friend on the floor before zooming into her parents' room to get her dad's .42 rifle. But when I came back, the noise stopped, and that creature was gone. Emily was rocking back and forth, holding her knees close to her, shaking and crying. She saw its face as clear as I did. The rest of the night, we had all the lights on in the house, and we stayed huddled together in the living room with the rifle right under my legs. Finally, after what seemed like years, the sun rose and her parents walked through the door. Instantly, her dad noticed our fear-stricken expressions and his gun under my legs. They sat down and softly asked both of us what happened. When I explained it, they shared worried glances before announcing that we were moving. We never asked why. We were just happy to get the hell out of there. We moved that exact day to my family's vacation home in a very populated city with little to no trees. When my own parents got home, and we told them, they had the same reactions. And they told me I could never go out after dark alone, and to stay away from wooded areas. Of course, I never questioned it, and to this day, I don't know if it was a skinwalker that some people believe in, or if it was an imposter. What I do know, though, that it was not human. My mom recently shared a strange and creepy experience that she and her sibling and parents witnessed when she was younger, at around 6 years of age. My mom is not the type of person to lie about this just to scare someone. And also, my aunts and uncles have verified the story individually. My grandparents, mother, aunts, and uncles lived in a small pueblo, a small town, in Mexico with a population of about 1,000 people. They were all scattered throughout the landscape. They lived at the bottom of one of the larger cerros, or hills, that would take a couple of hours to get to the very top. My abuelitos were very poor. My grandfather was making just enough to provide for their necessities by working at a sugar cane field. But yet they were living in one of the nicer homes because of its proximity to the hill and what everyone would say, a witch's house at the top of that hill. Everybody around there stayed away from that house, and the rent was the cheapest there was out of everything else, out of all the other houses that were available. My abuelitos, grandparents, tias y tios, aunts and uncles, and my mom had some paranormal experiences in that house. Most of these were attributed to the witch in typical Mexican folklore fashion. This thing that they witnessed, however, was what made them leave. Mi madre, my mom says that one day she was inside at the entrance of the home with the door wide open, playing with some toys. My tios and tias, aunts and uncles, were in the same room behind her also, while my abuelito was relaxing on a rocking chair in that room. She said she was playing and the door to the house was open. As she looked up, as a medium-sized black dog was walking along the road in front of the home. What spooked her was that this dog had 2 human breasts hanging from its chest that were connected to its skin as if it was part of its body. She says that the breasts were hairless, which allowed her to see that they were indeed the breast of a human and not some sort of tumor on the dog. My mom says that the dog instantly gave her a very bad feeling and she started to cry. My mom's crying then caused the dog to stop in its tracks and look into the doorway towards my mom. That's when my grandfather got up and headed towards the door, as so did my uncles, to see what was happening. He instantly recognized what the creature was and pulled out a small gun he always carried with him because of the long treks he made on foot to his job. He aimed the gun and tried pulling the trigger, but the gun kept jamming and would not fire. He tried it a few times, each time checking and making sure the gun was in proper working order, but it simply would not fire. All the while, the dog was just standing there, watching. The dog eventually turned and started running down the road and into some overgrowth along the side of the road. After it disappeared from view, my grandfather tried shooting his gun and it fired without a hitch. Even though they were very limited financial-wise, they moved out within a week after this encounter. Unfortunately, both of my grandparents passed when I was very young, so I cannot ask them about this event. I also never heard of skinwalkers partially changing, turning, and I found this story quite interesting. Sometimes, when we gather together as a family, joking and playing and having a good time, I tell my mom to bring up this story just to give everybody a spook. In a quick summary, that she saw a black dog with human breast hanging from its chest. Grandfather's firearm jammed when he was trying to fire at the dog, and then the gun started working perfectly fine once this dog ran away. Most of my family, when they hear this story, believe it was the bruja, the witch, who lived on top of the cerro, the hill, who apparently, they always say, was a nagual. My mom told me about an experience that she had when she encountered a nagual in the place where my mom grew up. She said that a group of town people were saying that they were seeing a large black bird out at night and it was creeping people out. So one day, some guys got in a truck and encountered a large black bird in the middle of the road following them. One guy took a shot at it and they said that the bullet went through its wing and it flew away. But they recall that when they shot it, they heard the scream, the wail of a woman. Later on, they noticed that an old lady who lived in an isolated home by herself all of a sudden had her arm in a sling and she had a wound from a gunshot. She had already been suspected of being a bruja or a nagual, and they believed that this incident confirmed it. I'm not Navajo or Native or even Indian, but I have a skinwalker story. So here it goes. I go along with a friend to check out his grandfather's hogan. For those who don't know, a hogan is basically an old traditional Navajo dwelling place, mostly made out of logs and mud, with a door traditionally facing east. Anyways, his grandfather is in the hospital for a spell. My friend says that his grandfather had an accident there on the property. We get to the place and we're hanging out for a while, drinking some beers and sharing a blunt. When out of nowhere, my friend goes real still and puts his finger up to his lips like he wants me to be quiet. I hear this shuffling noise coming from just outside. And just an FYI, my friend has dark skin. So as I look at him, his face turns several shades more pale. The shuffling noise becomes more loud, as if someone is coming towards the door. My friend grabs a piece of burning firewood out of the stove. He goes over to the door and hurls it out in front of the hogan. We then hear it hit the ground, and immediately there is this high-pitched laughter, something like the Wicked Witch of the West. Every hair on my body stands up. My friend starts yelling out in some native language. All I can do is pull out my pocket knife and hold it up to be ready. The person outside just keeps laughing, and I finally get the cojones to move over towards the door and peek out. My heart nearly jumps out of my chest. Only several feet from me is this Skinwalker. It's leaning up against the wall just to the right, thin and scraggly, covered with these animal skins, and staring back at me with these eyes like black marbles. I'm convinced it's a woman, as I see what looks to be breasts beneath the skins, but thin and sagging, like she's really old. Her face is covered with splotches of hair, and I can't tell if it's real or some kind of get-up. I let out a bit of scream, though I hate to admit it, and it just turns and jogs off towards the hills to the other side of the hogan. That's the only time I've seen a Skinwalker since, and I hope I never see one again. To start this off, there are 0 bears, moose, or elk where I lived at the time. At the time I was around 12 or 14, and I was with my friend, who I will call Kayla. We planned on going on a picnic around her fields. As we walked up a smaller hill, Kayla pushed me to the ground and whispered, "Do you see that?" At least 20 or so feet away, there was a dark figure. It was standing on 4 thin limbs, and its head was narrow, similar to a horse or a deer, but it was completely black. I couldn't make out the features, but it had a mane like a lion. The mane-like fur ran along its back, stopping near the rear, and it also had no tail. Here's a side note: all of the cattle were moved to a completely different area, nowhere near this one, so no other livestock animals were in those fields. But this thing was just staring off. Suddenly, my friend stood up and made a rush for the exit that was at least 2 miles away. I didn't hesitate to follow her. We finally stopped near the latch fence that leads to where she stays at, and we looked back. It was slowly walking back into the trees. This sight, to this day, still gives me chills. I guess I'll start with a background. I'm a 33-year-old female, but the story takes place when I was a teenager, living in the suburb of Chicago. The village I lived in was quiet and middle class. We lived like a mile from the police station, and the worst crimes we had was a murder or two and robbery once in a blue moon. 99% of the time, boring and more boring. Unless you had a car, you were stuck just walking around the park at night with your friends, which was kind of boring. But anyways, one night, my girlfriend and I decided to go hang out at a park with some guys at like 12 a.m. The night was a bit windy and had a full moon. I even got a kiss that night from the boy that I liked. But the night wasn't just fun and hanging out late. There's a deep forest in the park, with a stream with a playground right next to it. The same playground we went to, with swings and jungle gym columns. There's a bridge, the one that everyone uses, and another bridge made of rocks that's barely used because it's deeper in the forest. They're both over the stream, connecting the forest and park area. I'll get to the rock bridge in a minute. We hung around on the swings and chatted and just spent the evening together. I'm sitting down and just looking around, talking and enjoying the peace and quiet and the moonlight. I have a full view of the forest. I then see something moving deep in the woods, some dark shape. It looked like it was crawling out of the forest, an arm, then another arm. Then it pulls itself out of the stream. This figure happens to be darker than the surrounding forest. As I'm just sitting there, frozen, I think I'm seeing things. And it just kind of lays there on the ground, but it doesn't move. A flash of fear comes across me. What if it comes this way? I then look over to my friends, and no one notices anything. I look back, and it's gone. Did it go back or go somewhere? At this point, I really want to get out of there. Then, one of my friends is asking all of us, "Did you guys hear about the urban legend of the rock bridge over the stream?" Apparently, some kids or something played on the bridge and fell over and died. What a thing to say after what I saw, but I didn't ask anyone anything and just pretended that I never saw anything. But this experience stuck with me. I never talked about it because it must have been my imagination. Things like that only happen in scary movies, right? After all of this, I rarely went to the park after that. Who knows what would have happened if this black thing saw me the same time that I saw it. I live right next to a Navajo reservation and have made friends with many of the people there my age. We like to hang out, play video games, and just be normal teens. I walk over a lot since my best friend lives a little less than a mile away from me. This isn't a long trek, and it only takes about 25 to 30 minutes. I have made this trip dozens of times and have grown very comfortable with it. I know the people along the way, so I'm not scared or on edge. There is a patch of forest, however, about midway there. It's a little unnerving sometimes. There's always that feeling of being watched. This was a regular occurrence for me, so I try to just ignore it and shake it off as my mind playing tricks on me. This day, I spent more time at my friend's house than I meant to, and when I left, it was already getting dark. I reached the stretch of forest right as the sun disappeared from the sky. I shivered a little as I readied myself to begin the journey through. I was 10 steps in when I heard a branch snap. You know the sound, the one that screams, "There is definitely someone or something there with you." I froze, not sure what I should do next. Should I run? Should I turn around and book it back to my friend's house? I didn't know the best option in this situation, so I whispered, "Hello?" Hearing my voice crack as the words fell from my lips, I don't know why I even opened my mouth, but it was out there, so I listened for any reply. My heart sank when the answer came back in the sound of my voice. "Hello?" My heart pounded against my chest. I felt like I was gonna faint. "Hello?" My voice came again, but not from my mouth. I wanted to run, but my feet felt cemented to the ground. I couldn't scream. I couldn't reply. "Hello? Hello? Hello? hello, hello, as my voice echoed over and over from a short distance away. I couldn't pinpoint exactly where it was coming from. It sounded like it was everywhere around me. Hello, 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 it repeated. Stop it! I finally managed to tear from my lips. Everything went silent. For a long minute, nothing happened. The air grew stale, and I realized for the first time that there was no typical forest sound. There were no bugs, no frogs, or crickets. Nothing. I stood there, terrified, waiting to see what would happen next. Stop it! It mimicked back. I had enough and was willing my heavy legs to move. Before I could take a step, I heard some rustling in the bushes 20 feet to my left. I watched as a deer head with huge antlers protruded through the brush as it came further out and stood up on twos. I took off. I flew out of the woods and all the way home in record time. I said nothing to my mom when I got there. I just went up to my room, laid down, and thought about what happened. My mom came in at some point and asked me if everything was alright. I replied yes, I was just tired. I don't know why I didn't tell her. I guess I was afraid of how she would react. I called my friend and told him everything. He freaked out and told me that no matter what happened that night, to not reply or look out my window. But this terrified me even more. He said to call him the next morning and he would explain more, and that he had to speak to his grandfather as soon as possible. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I stayed awake, listening to every little sound the night brought. Around 3 a.m., just as I was about to drift off, the air changed. The night sounds got quiet. I felt my heart begin to pound. I lay there and waited, pulling the covers over my head like a child, far too scared to move. It came after a long moment. Hello? I cried. It was all I could do. Hello? Stop it! It mocked what I had said in the woods again. It was terrifying enough when it copied what I said. But then, it did something new. It called my name. Amy. My mother's voice. Amy! Amy! Come here. Hello? Stop it! My voice again. For the rest of the night, the creature outside my window called my name in my mother's voice and repeated what I said in the woods over and over. In the morning, when the sun broke through the dark, it finally stopped. I fell into a deep sleep. I woke up around 12 to my friend calling to tell me he had spoken to his grandfather and could explain what happened to me. He said there was a creature that they called yenaglooshi, or he who goes on all fours, or a skinwalker. He explained that it was an evil witch that used dark magic to transform into an animal with the attributes it required, and that this witch had caught my scent and knew me now. I was also given a warning that since it knew me, it would always follow me, and that I would always have to be careful. Last night, I heard scratching on my window. Then, a low hum. The creature began saying my name again, but also adding in things I hadn't said in my mother's voice. At one point, it started calling my name, but drawing it out really far, like Amy. It tried to get me to come outside or to open the door and let it into my house. This went on all night. At this point, I feel like I'm going crazy. I don't know what to do. Is this thing seriously going to stalk the shadows around me for the rest of my life? I don't think I can take that. Many of you who love paranormal stuff may have already heard of the word nagual here in Mexico, and I would guess that also in some other countries in Latino America we call that way people who can shapeshift into animals. Well, here's my story. It was a cold night, I remember, because it was really weird for it to get cold on that side of the country. This was in my parents' house, in a small pueblo, or small town, and back in the day, it was one of the last houses outside of town. Not so many neighbors, but a lot of trees and nature around. The house has a long backyard where we used to have sheep. At one side, a small water stream and trees to the other side. The sheep then started to bleat very loud, something we could call screams. My father then went to give a check on a window in the back side of the house. I still recall his face when he came back quickly, and in a low, urgent voice, he told my mom, "Ve agarra a tu padre y a tus hermanos y diles que vengan ya ahorita. Go ask your father and brothers to come here immediately." They were 4 brothers, my grandfather and my father. When everyone was there, a few minutes later, my father started to tell us what he saw. In the barn, we had 10 sheep. At the moment my father gave a look, all of them were together in just one corner. At the center, there was some kind of big animal. My father described it as a bear, which makes totally no sense, but he said it was big, hairy, and it seemed to be eating one sheep there. This one sheep was screaming really bad. Then my grandfather told my mom to keep us inside of the house and to keep me in there also with her. If you go outside now, you may catch a bad air. So he made some kind of prayer holding his machete. So his prayer, I remember he said the names of my uncles and also my father's. He then went outside. That's when my grandfather started to yell at the darkness, telling things like, "Vete de aquí, no tienes nada que ver aquí. Deja esta casa. Go away, you have nothing to do here. Leave this house." My father told me that he saw how this thing was in a pose, eating the sheep, which was laying on the ground, still screaming by the way, and when my grandfather yelled at it, this thing seemed to stop and raise its head up towards my family. This thing was only staring at them. Not a single noise, and also no red or shining eyes, only the shadow looked like it was looking at them. So my father decided to do something at last. He took a big rock, he picked it up from the ground and threw it at this thing. Maybe not the best thing to do in this situation, but I guess this thing was not that strong. Or maybe because it was 6 of us and we all had machetes. But when the rock hit it, this being turned its back and ran away to the forest, running on all 4 legs like an animal would. They then approached the sheep, and my grandpa said how the sheep was on the ground, but it was still alive, but it was completely unskinned. It was horrifying, at least. My grandfather then sacrificed it to stop the suffering. After that night, a family friend told us a story about someone new in town that apparently was a nagual. He told us he spoke to that man and he told him to leave the town. Indeed, we never happened to live something similar after that. I saw some videos about skinwalkers on TikTok. So I started watching videos about them on YouTube, and there was a whole podcast where this guy just read stories about them from Reddit and other stories that people submitted. Our ward at church purchased a piece of land way back in the day. It's seriously just wooded area with a little bit of swamp. We would always go there for campouts and scouts, and at night, when it was pitch black, we would all play manhunt. Well, one time, we all got down to one person whose name was David. Growing up, he was super fast, and he would hide really good, so nobody could ever find him. He would always end up being the last person. Well, one time, it was down to David, and we had split up and gone way deep in the forest towards the swamp because it seems like it was impossible to find him. We thought he might have gone a little bit further than we normally go. We started getting into some more muddy and wet terrain as we get closer to a swamp-like area where the water is most likely shin deep, and we saw David way out in the swamp, and he wasn't wearing a shirt, and with the spotlight on him, he looked super pale, but he just stood there and didn't say a word. You could seriously tell something was off. Then, all of a sudden, we heard David from behind us, yelling, trying to get our attention, so we would keep trying to chase him down. Meaning, what we saw in front of us was definitely not him. So being a bunch of 12 to 17-year-old boys, we started yelling and running back to the campsite as fast as we could. Nobody believed us. In fact, for years everybody made fun of it, calling the ghost of David. But then I started listening to these stories, and every single one of them sounds just like what happened in some way or another. My dad told me a long time ago about a time when he was a teenager in Mexico, and it was late, and he was walking home after hanging out with his friends. My dad grew up in a rancho, and it was real dark, and the town that he's from is old. Anyways, there was no one out on the road, and he was walking, and he heard a sound, so he looked around at this abandoned house. The house was falling apart, and the windows were nothing but dark openings. He said he saw the back of a man sitting on the top of a roof with his back towards him. As my dad walked past the house, he looked back to see the man still on the roof, and my dad said that the man's legs were so long they touched the ground. I actually think my dad saw Slender Man long before anyone knew what that was. My family doesn't have a rancho, or a ranch. However, we live near a mountain where there are 3 crucifixes, and each year, in Semana Santa, they replace them, which takes about 6 days. While they are gone, it is said that everybody in the community and around there says that the witches go out to hunt children. One year, they heard chains being dragged on the roof at nighttime. My father told me about a time in the 70s when he was driving to his hometown in San Luis Potosí with my mom asleep in the back and her dad in the passenger seat. He said it was late at night and it was raining. The road they were on was empty and long and had lots of turns and curves, and the visibility was bad. He said they both spotted a man standing on the side of the road in the pouring rain trying to catch a ride. My dad didn't stop and kept driving, and my abuelito, grandfather, commented saying poor guy standing out in the rain. They didn't think much of it. However, My dad said that a few minutes later, after passing another curve, they saw the same man, again, standing on the side of the road. It was the same guy. They both freaked out and my grandfather said, "Es el diablo, it's the devil," and to keep driving. When I went to Mexico with my dad in the mid-80s, they lived in a rancho, and my dad told me to go to bed once because after midnight, some of the animals that have been cursed by witches start to talk, and they will come around looking for anyone who will talk with them. So if you live in a rancho, in a farm, or own livestock or animals of any kind, be careful if you hear them talking to you tonight. My mother lived in the countryside and told us of something that happened when she was a kid. She was asleep and heard a weird clicking noise, como una pluma, like the clicking of a pen. She looked outside and said there was a weird thing outside making the noise. It looked like a humanoid, grayish thing, just standing outside their house, looking in. My mom then closed the curtains and started blessing the house, and she said that she never saw the thing again. I want to say this was a skinwalker, walking through the neighborhood, whistling, trying to see who would whistle or talk back.